Well, it's not often that we have a bonus show in On the Ledge, but we are doing that this week. So welcome in. And this week on the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Keith Leslie, John Wright, and I kicked around the AGM that the Ontario Liberal Party held last weekend. We did about a post-mortem on that, finding out, what they look like now coming out of the meeting. What are the prospects? Also get into a rather spirited discussion about the state of our healthcare services and system in the province. But as promised, we're also going to include in the feed today an interview I did earlier in the week. Tuesday, sat down with former Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne, talked about her view of the Liberal Party, what Toronto needs moving forward, and the things she misses most about sitting in the big chair at Queen's Park. Enjoy. This is the Now and Next edition from Story Studio Network.
An original
from Story Studio Network.
Well, welcome in. Here we go. It is Tuesday, March the 7th. It's Now and Next for Story Studio Network. I'm Dave Trafford. We're here in your podcast feed Monday to Thursday with Now and Next, and then on Friday we gather the On the Ledge crew, your Ontario Politics podcast. And there's always something to talk about. Last week we had a rather spirited discussion about the merits of a delegated convention versus one member, one vote. I know Sabrina and Angie at Queen's Park is just, told you so. The three old guys on the panel yearning for the days of the delegated convention. And not because they were exciting, and they were, but I think it was really grassroots politics at a party level in action. And no way to tell now because nobody's doing it anymore. The Ontario Liberals deciding on the weekend to go with the weighted one member, one vote. And that's how they're going to select their new leader. So when they made that decision, I thought, I'm just going to send an email off and see if we can get somebody to talk about this. And I got an answer right away, and the answer was sure. So I'm thrilled that Kathleen Wynne is joining us, former Premier of Ontario. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm okay. You got through the wild weather to head down to Hamilton for the Liberal gathering on the weekend?
Yeah, we went a bit early to get there in one piece, and we made it. Yeah, it was good. There were 1,500 people or more. It was a pretty energized crowd. It was great.
And again, we kind of sat back and talked about this on the politics podcast the last couple of weeks, and the importance of that decision first to go with a one member, one vote. Was that your vote?
Do I have to reveal that?
Well, I don't know.
So I'm torn on this, Dave, to be honest. I knew that the decision of the party was going to be to go to one member, one vote. And I understand that there's a desire to change. What I worry about with the one member, one vote is that there is no possibility on the floor of the convention for there to be that person-to-person conversation and a different consensus evolve. That's what I worry about. Now, maybe I'm biased because I know for sure if I hadn't been elected if there hadn't been a delegated convention when I was running for leader, I wouldn't have won because I was not the odds-on favorite going in. But as the convention evolved and our speeches were made, people changed their minds, and that's a challenge when all the voting's been done ahead of time. So I worry a little bit about that, but I think that there will have to be some things that will change in terms of the pre-convention process. I think there'll have to be more regional conversation. John Fraser, who's our interim leader, was talking about, we'll have to have some sort of primary system regionally around the province. So people will have a chance to listen to all the leaders and make their decision. It will be a good process once we make it our own.
Well, and I think you hit on the right chord there, because the two things happen when you have the delegated convention. And I was in the room when you all made your speeches the night before. You could feel the room changes, and you've seen that happen a lot. Certainly, when another candidate falls off the ballot, I just about broke my neck trying to walk backwards and talk to Gerard Kennedy after he crossed the floor to your side of the room. There's a certain character in the momentum. There's a certain character in the room all of a sudden that changes. And I think you're right that the conversation becomes deeper. It becomes more serious. There's more skin in the game, quite frankly. And I think that's probably vital to any party unity, particularly when you come out of a hard-fought convention.
Yeah, and I'm really a fan of the people making the decision being people who are committed to the party, and who are really deeply invested in the party. And in the delegated convention process, as you guys have talked about, there's a pretty robust on the ground riding association process to choose those delegates. All those features we're going to have to find a way, I think, to build into this new process. But on the weekend, it was very clear to me that the younger people in the room, the next generation, were really committed to this, and so they will make it work. I know they will. I have a lot of confidence in them. One of the things I loved about the AGM this past weekend was that there were so many young people in the room, so many young people who want to see the party rise up again, who are committed to the work that we have already done and committed to how we can work going forward. So I'm confident in them. It's hard, change is hard, and when you've been part of something that you're committed to, there are anxieties, but we'll forge on. It'll be great.
Does that change the quality of the leader that's chosen? Because I mean, as we look to other circumstances where it's been one party or one member, one vote, particularly the federal Conservatives, there hasn't been a long, shelf life there for those leaders. Now, I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but to me, it only illustrates how easy all of this seems to be in terms of selecting a new leader. I just put my ballot in the mail and off it goes. I'm not connected to it. So it's easy to sit on and gripe and, moan on the sidelines when things don't quite go your way. And then I can do the same thing almost anonymously and flush the leadership down. So I don't know if that's related or not, but we're in that kind of environment now.
Well, I'm not sure about easy, because the organizers have to work really hard. I mean, we think about Poilievre's campaign, for sure, Jenny Byrne was working 24/8, So I'm not sure about the ease, but what I do know is that we need to be careful that we distinguish between leadership and organizational capacity, because just because you're a good organizer doesn't mean you're going to be a good leader. Just because you can gather a team that can organize and convince people to do what you said, mark a ballot and send it in, that doesn't mean you're going to be a good leader. And if I look at some of the one member, one vote, Patrick Brown, Doug Ford, Pierre Poilievre, again, I may be biased, but I can even say Stephen Del Duca. I mean, that was not one member, one vote, but he was a good organizer. We need to build in a process that allows people to test the leadership capacity in some way of the candidates. And if we're going to lose that on the floor convention process, then how are we going to build that in across the province? Because we need, in the Liberal Party, we need a strong leader. Dalton McGuinty won 3 elections. I won the 4th. We were able to govern in this province. And of course, there are people who at the end hated us, whatever. But there was a lot of work that was done that has had lasting impact on people's lives in a good way. And so we want to get back to that. But that's only going to happen if we have someone who is able to rally the team and has those leadership capacities. And it's not just about the political organizational process.
Is this the third pitch here? I mean, if you whiff on this time, this is almost an existential situation for the provincial party, for the Liberals.
Well, I think the next election is going to be very different. I think if you look across the country, there are lots of Liberals who are challenged by the current sort of populist right-wing movement that seems to be in place. But I think that we've got time now to build a really strong case, and I think people are going to be in a different place in 2026 than they are today. So obviously we were disappointed with the last election, but our popular vote increased, and the distribution of seats didn't help us, but that we will. I really have a lot of confidence we'll be able to change that in the next election.
Yeah, I mean, to your point about the Liberals across the country kind of struggling with the populist right, doesn't seem to be an issue necessarily in Alberta, where Rachel Notley is depending on the day looking at just closely behind or closely ahead of the Conservatives. So, but there's no Liberal on the map there. So when you look across the board, there's a lot of Conservatives who are running the provinces in this country. There are NDP members who are emerging, but there's the sort of that pulse of Liberal momentum has kind of, waned right from one side of the country to the other. Maybe in Atlantic Canada, you got a little bit more character there, but certainly without it here in Ontario, doesn't that hurt it?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm not arguing that we're in good shape as Liberals across the country. Not at all. I would say that Rachel, an NDP member in Alberta and a Liberal member in Ontario are not that different in terms of their outlook. Now that I'll get howls of outrage from the NDP in Alberta, but when I was premier and Rachel was premier, we were working pretty closely together. So I mean, that's part of the issue, Dave. The brand means different things provincially across the country, for sure. But yeah, it's not a good situation. And I think one of the challenges of polarization and populism is that people pick a side, and we're a centrist party. So picking a side doesn't mean picking the middle. And that's the case that we have to make, is that those the far left or the far right of the political continuum is not where we have as Canadians usually been. And certainly as Ontarians, that's not where we've been. I mean, if I think about when I was growing up, Bill Davis as premier, he was hardly a hard right conservative. He was definitely a centrist. So we've got a case to make here in Ontario for sure. It's 40% of the population, and if we don't have a strong Liberal conversation here, that really hurts. It hurts at the premier's table for sure. And so that's our work. We've got our work cut out for us.
For those of you following along at home, you can't see, but I'm wearing my red shirt. Kathleen Wynne is wearing her blue sweater. That is not any indication of political strife on this discussion. Federally, I just want your take on what's going on there in terms of, sort of the state of the Liberals federally, because, as we record this, the Prime Minister is talking about a rapporteur who's going to come in and investigate what's may or may not have happened with the Chinese, and he's getting all kinds of grief. First, it's not enough. Second, it's too late. And even the likes of our friend Scott Reid calling it acute incumbent carcinoma that the Liberals are suffering from, that in fact, if they don't do something to revive that, the Liberal brand federally is in jeopardy in terms of being able to, get reelected. And otherwise we face a Poilievre government. So there seems to be fires on all front here.
Our darling Scott Reid, who never holds back.
No, really, I know he's quiet about it.
Yeah. The Prime Minister, I believe, and I've said this publicly, he had to do something. He had to respond to people's anxiety. It's this weird confluence of things, Dave. The balloons that were being shot down, and then all of a sudden we get these reports about election interference. I think people are anxious. They just don't feel like they've got enough information. So yeah, would it have been great if he had announced earlier? I think so. I think it would have been good, but who knows what's going on behind the scenes? Who knows what his security briefings have been? We just don't have that information. That's part of the problem. Maybe he made this announcement as soon as he could. I just don't know. But let's see who this person is. I don't think there's been a name announced yet. Let's see what questions he is tasked with answering, because we're not going to know everything. There are going to be actions, and there's going to be advice that we're not going to have access to. But let's see if we can get the answers that we need, and the answers that will shore up what the Prime Minister is saying, which is there was no undue influence that was exerted in those elections. But I think the question that a lot of us have is, well, what's the base level? Like, what is this an ongoing thing that we just have to get used to? That doesn't feel very good. And if it's not, then what are you going to do? What is the government going to do to make sure that that this stops? Because I think we're realistic enough to know that there probably will be some ongoing discussion about this. But let's not just accept that there's ongoing interference from not just China but other countries as well. I just don't think Canadians want to hear that message, for sure. So I'm more open-minded than my good friend Scott in terms of the reaction. I think what the opposition, I think what Poilievre is doing, which is just to hammer and scream and yell about this. Sure, it has pushed people and made people anxious. I'm not sure it's helpful in terms of the democratic process, but he sees that as his job, and I think the Prime Minister has responded as he needs.
Well, but I take issue with that. I'm not sure he has, in as much as he probably could have said just what you said. Listen, we're investigating these three things. We can't tell you everything behind the curtain because there are issues around international security and the Five Eyes. But rest assured that we are talking about this, that, and the other. We are investigating this in our own way. If he had said that. But I mean, to then, the whole accusation around racism and all this nonsense, I mean, that got out of hand in a hurry. So I don't necessarily disagree with the Poilievre comment, but I'm not sure the Prime Minister responded as well as he could have.
Well, and to my mind, it was about the timing. I think that those things should have been said earlier. Mm-hmm. When you drag these things out, it becomes an issue. Because people get more anxious. And as I said, there was a confluence of events that made people feel like, wait a minute, we don't know what's going on here. And you're telling us everything's okay, but we don't know what you're doing. So I think you're right. I think we needed that said earlier. I would say the timing was, if the Prime Minister had made the announcement that he made yesterday, a week ago, I think we would be having a different conversation.
Oh, entirely. Talk to me about what you think Toronto needs in its next mayor, because I know, I heard you talking to Maureen Holloway and Wendy Mesley on their podcast, and you outlined for them the competitive relationship that you two had because you ran against each other, but then the working relationship you had. And I was talking to Tim Hudak a while ago about this and wondered aloud whether or not, to some degree, John has set the bar pretty high for the next mayor of the city of Toronto, and is it possible that somebody can reach that? And when I say that, it has a lot to do with the relationship between the city, Queen's Park, and Ottawa. And, in years past, that was one thing, but post-COVID, I think it's become even more pronounced, where Toronto stands on its own and will take slings and arrows from the rest of the country and stop your whining and all that kind of stuff, and how precious you are. But you will know better than anybody that a lot of what happens in this city, the $1 billion hole in the budget, a lot of that is services that have been downloaded by other governments, or they're slow in paying for what they committed to. How do we How do we rejig this? We can't just keep cutting a check every year for that shortfall. Do we not need to have a redefined relationship, Toronto and the other levels of government?
Well, the City of Toronto Act that we brought in did give the City of Toronto some powers. I think that needs to be revisited, Dave. I think that there are probably other things that the City of Toronto needs to have autonomy on. But to answer your first question about what does the City of Toronto need, and has John set the bar high? I think he set the bar high in terms of competent, calm leadership. Yeah, I think he really has. But I think right now the City of Toronto needs a risk taker. I think the City of Toronto needs someone who's going to come in and say boldly, these are the things we're going to tackle right now. The things that are getting people down in the city are the kind of ragged edges right now. They're worried about the TTC. They're worried about garbage on the streets. They're worried about not having a solution around people having to live on the street. That's a more complicated one, I think, than getting the garbage cleaned up. But those are really visible signs of decay that are not the way we think about our city. We think of our city as a kind of a bright shiny penny, but it hasn't been that for a while. So I think whoever comes in as the mayor is going to have to do a couple of things. Is going to have an immediate plan for tackling those very visible challenges that are getting people down, and then is going to have to demonstrate that they're able and interested in those longer term issues of working with the other levels of government. There are ways of dealing with revenue flow. There are infrastructure dollars that can flow to the government. There's gas tax money. There are things that we were in the process of doing that got canceled that can be revitalized. But the relationship with the premier and the relationship with the prime minister has to be a good one. I would suggest also that the mayor of Toronto has to recognize that the 905 is not a little sister or brother anymore, that those are big cities and they need to be part of the conversation. Where John and I got into a tussle about road tolls, which is one way to increase revenue into the city, was that there hadn't been a regional conversation. There was no discussion with the 905 leadership about what impact that would have. And that's why I didn't allow it. But that relationship with those GTA mayors is really important. And I mean, I could go on a whole long riff about what Mike Harris did and, not creating some kind of GTA conversation. When I was premier, I had a GTA mayor's table. We were working on an integrated fare system for transit across the GTA. Those kinds of things, I think, have to be worked on. And the Toronto mayor has a really important leadership role to play in that.
Okay, well, let's skip out to the 905 then. And I talked to Mayor Crombie recently, and her mission is to have Mississauga stand on its own, never mind amalgamating Peel. What's the option? What's the better option?
So Bonnie and I had this conversation a lot.
I'll bet.
because the Brampton, Caledon, Mississauga, the Peel model is kind of broken, and we tried to broker a change in that. It's complicated, Dave, because there are so many shared services across the Peel region. But I think that Bonnie's got some momentum in terms of Mississauga's independence. But what does that mean in terms of the regional governance? And that's the question that will be important to Brampton and Caledon, but it also will be important across the province. It'll be important in Kawartha. It'll be important in other parts, other places where there's regional government, where there isn't complete happiness with that model. So that's a big conversation that has to be had with the province. And the reason that neither I nor Doug Ford has moved to do that right away is that it is so complicated, and disentangling Brampton, particularly Brampton and Mississauga. I think Caledon could join with Dufferin. I think that would make some sense. But then how do Brampton and Mississauga relate? they're not easy questions to answer, and Bonnie knows that. But she's got some wind in her sails on this, and so we'll see what Doug Ford steps up to do.
Well, does she have enough wind in her sails to lead the Liberals?
Well, maybe he'll separate Mississauga from Peel in order to keep her as the mayor. So she won't run for the leadership of the Liberals.
But is she what the Liberals need, though? I mean, I realize she's got a big job in Mississauga, but boy, there's a lot of people will stand behind her and say, not only does she stand up for Mississauga, but she's probably the kind of voice we need in a healthy legislative assembly that includes a character like Doug Ford. And I'm not saying that to be critical. I'm just saying we need strong opposition, and Mr. Fraser, I think, is the reluctant leader right now, and I don't expect that he thought he would be sitting in that chair as long as he has.
No, definitely not. Bonnie would be great. She would be great in the legislature. There are a number of members who are stepping up to run for leader, though, who would also be great. The thing about Bonnie is she's got a lot of experience, and she's got a lot of experience leading, and that is, that would stand her in really good stead as a leadership candidate. So I'm not picking a lane here, Dave.
You're just observing.
But I'm just saying that she would bring a whole lot to the leadership race, and a whole lot to the. Quite frankly, she'd bring a whole lot to the Premier's chair. And the 905 is so critical to the province. It's not just critical to the region, it's critical to the province, it's critical to the economic well-being of the country, quite frankly, because that's the engine of certainly our economic well-being in certainly eastern Canada. So I think it would be wonderful if she chose to jump into the race. I don't know that she's going to do it. She's got a big job now. So we'll see. But would I love to see her in the race? Absolutely.
Just before we go, I was listening to you on Women of Ill Repute. I thought, wow, I wonder what she thinks of being invited to be on that show.
Oh, I love it. I love being a woman of ill repute. Who wants to be a good girl?
Well, I also learned that you're not a hockey player.
I'm not a hockey player.
I thought.
Oh no, that's Jane.
Oh, Jane.
That was
Jane.
I
see.
I actually am a skater, and I did play a little bit of hockey, but no, it was Jane who the woman at that party said, you can't be a real lesbian unless you play hockey. It's like, what? What are you talking about?
Oh.
But no, I do. Well, I mean, and the hockey I played before I came out, so the stereotypes don't work, Dave.
There you go. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. But I roared. I must have missed the name because I was laughing so hard when you guys got talking about it. And I bring it up because still, and I think I probably said it one day when you were in on a roundtable on John Moore's show and I was hosting, and I referred to Stephen Del Duca as a win loser, and I thought afterwards that might have been a mean thing to say, but then I thought, no, you've heard a lot more mean things than that. That didn't justify necessarily my comment.
From your peers and colleagues, I have.
Yes. Indeed. So, but even in social media, all these other places, and I saw this past week a young reporter at Global who had just been laid off, and she was one of many. And I told her she is in good company, maybe not present company included, but the idea that, she lost her job, which is the state of the being. But during the course of her work for Global as a reporter, she was subject to some just vile social media attacks and, threats. Mm-hmm. And we let that kind of thing happen. And I just wonder, I heard you say we're no further ahead than we were. Social media becomes that kind of accelerant for that anger, that's response. And, what kind of skin have you had to sort of develop, that callous, and I use that advisedly, to sort of deal with that?
So a couple of things on that. I think there are things that have changed. Young women, I'm teaching a couple of courses at U of T, or have for the last couple of years, and young people don't accept the garbage that we did. They name it, they call it out. it doesn't mean they're immune to it. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means that they see it differently than we do. So I think that's some progress. In terms of the thick skin, and I mean, hundreds of times people have said to me, you must have to have a really thick skin, and that's true. But I always say, yeah, it has to be thick, but it has to be porous. You can't wear armor. You have to have a porous skin so that the criticisms can come in. You can sort through them and figure out which are legitimate and which aren't. But you have to be able to hear what people are saying. You can't just write people off as being wrong every time just because they're attacking one. I completely agree with you that social media is an accelerant, and it's like it's dredging up misogyny, sexism, anger, vitriol that I would have hoped by the time I was 69 we wouldn't have had to be dealing with, because this journey for me started when I was a kid, and that we're still dealing with a lot of this stuff is very disheartening. I'm going to be making a speech to some young people at U of T for International Women's Day tomorrow, and I'm going to be saying that I can't promise them that it's going to be fixed by the time they go out into the world in 4 years. These are first year kids. But what we can do is we can sort of understand what's going on, understand that there is, there's an underbelly to misogyny, that it exists, that transphobia and all of these biases exist, and we have to keep challenging them. We have to keep challenging them in our private lives. We have to keep challenging them in our public lives, and find ways in our own personal lives. And this is what I've had to do. Find ways in our personal lives to continue to do the work, because the work is what heals those attacks. So when I was at the sort of the midterm of my majority government, and my numbers started to go down, and people started to get angry at me, and the anger came through questions that the media were asking me and so on. I had to hear that, be respectful, and I had to continue to do the work. And that's what I guess I ask young people to do, because it's worth it. And in the meantime, do we need to regulate social media? Do we need to find ways to create more consensus about the public good? Absolutely. But we can't stop doing our own work while we wait for all that to be fixed, because it's not going to be, and there's a lot to do.
So how is private life versus public service?
Very different. I miss being in the I miss being in my constituency, working with people. I miss being in the legislature. I miss being at the heart. And even as an MPP, even if you're not the premier, you're kind of at the heart of the matter in terms of what's happening in government. I still pay really close attention, and I guess I always will. I don't know that will ever change, but I miss it every day. People say to me, aren't you glad that you weren't there during COVID? And my answer is no, because things would have been different. That's the reality. You have a different way of doing things, and so when I listen to what's happening, I'm constantly thinking, well, what would my take on that be, and how would I do that differently, and how can I help in terms of explaining to people who ask me what's going on. And I see that as my role right now, Dave. Particularly young people have a lot of questions about government and why decisions get made and how decisions get made. And so, I feel like it's my responsibility, and it's my honor really to take that experience that I had as an elected official and as a leader and try to pull the curtain back a bit on how those decisions get made, because people don't necessarily understand government, and they don't have time. Their lives are busy. They're not going to spend the time to read the reports that come out necessarily, and nor should they. So I feel like that's the work I have in front of me now, apart from being a grandma, which is the best work.
Best job in the world.
Best job in the world.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, we've got 2 down east and 1 here in Toronto. So, and it just changes your life.
You can hardly believe that you can love a little being as much as you loved your own children, and
Yeah.
you do.
Yeah. And well, not to get off at a tangent or keep you longer, but here's the other thing I've noticed, and this extraordinary evolution of this human, and all different characters and, you know, personalities. And I'm stating the obvious, but from the perspective of a grandparent, it's a different lens, first of all. But the second part of that lens is watching your kids develop as parents. That is just, you know, unbelievable. I mean, and it wasn't what I expected when I watched that happen, you know.
It's a joy. It's a joy, you know. I'm laughing because my eldest grandchild is 13, and she's given her mom a run for her money. And I don't chuckle to my daughter's face, but I do chuckle. Because what goes around comes around, sweetheart.
That's right. I say this all the time. You know, Erin and I talked when she was 9, and then we had a real conversation when she was about 19. There was that dark hole we both went into. Wow, look, we came out on the right side. So and it all worked out. But, and here we are in business together. So that's all.
I just think that's awesome. You're working with her. That's great.
Yeah, it's all good fun. Listen, I like to think of myself as paying attention, and so, but there are times when I do have questions. So there are issues that I think, you know, I'd like to call on you every once in a while to clarify or just get your take on. We do a lot of work with the folks at Daily Bread Food Bank, and one of the numbers that strike me is that poverty costs this province $33 billion a year.
Let's have a conversation about basic income one time, Dave.
Yes, please. Yeah, okay. We'll do that. Very good.
Okay.
Kathleen Wynne, thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure. Thanks, Dave.
Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. And our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.